take something. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Julie Bazán. I'm the Executive Director for the Area Health Education Center. The Area Health Education Center is a program out of the UTHSCSA San Antonio, and it gives us a great privilege to say welcome to each one of you here today for making some time to attend this beautiful Lunch and Learn that is being made possible by a group of very wonderful people that are now part of our extended family. These individuals, who you will see in a few minutes, have been part of us now for 6-7 years, and we can still reminisce about the first time when we did that first presentation. But today we're here to learn something very important that I think may impact all of our families, our friends, our neighbors. So somebody that we know or we're close to or can relate to is probably afflicted with this illness. And so how can we help our loved ones is by getting the most information on the topic. And that is why we're here today. So it gives me a great pleasure to say welcome to the Alzheimer's Association. Without them, this would not be made possible. Can I ask you to give them a round of applause, please? Thank you very much. And then I also want to give a special recognition, besides the Area Health Education Center staff, to Meg and her entire team for making this possible and for bringing this resource to our community. So, ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Meg Barron to the mic. Meg?
Hi everyone, my name is Meg Barron and I'm the director for the Alzheimer's Association for the state of Texas. That little tiny little area. And I think Laredo is a big part of that. So we are so happy to have Dr. Maria Carillo here and be able to bring the leading Alzheimer's researcher in the world to Laredo. I couldn't think of a better place. We want to thank Julie and her team and UT Health and everyone for hosting us here. We've actually done a couple presentations here before, and I just love this facility, so really happy to be here, so thank you, Julie. So I'm going to read off some statistics. 380,000 Texans are living with Alzheimer's disease. 1.4 million unpaid caregivers are caring for them. Every 65 seconds, somebody is diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. It's staggering. And I can tell you, I can sit here all day and tell you about these statistics because that's part of my job at the Alzheimer's Association. We develop those statistics for researchers. But I hope one of the things you take away from here is that you can't do this alone, because I tried. My grandmother had Alzheimer's disease, and my father and I were her primary caregivers. And we tried to take care of her, because we're her family, right? So we were going to care for her. Toward the end of her 12 years with Alzheimer's disease, I started getting calls from my cousins, because it turns out my grandmother, 3 of her 4 sisters, also developed a form of dementia. So suddenly I became the Alzheimer's expert in my family. And trust me, I was not an expert back then. And I wish with all my heart that I had picked up the phone and called the Alzheimer's Association and asked for help. Asked for all the free resources they have, but I didn't, because I could do it on my own. And it was hard on me. I had to give up jobs. It cost a lot of money. My father went through a lot of stress, and it's affected his health. So being a caregiver, as probably everyone in this room knows, is the hardest thing you can possibly do. So we are here to tell you, please use us. We have a 24/7 helpline that's there staffed with trained counselors, English and Spanish. It's than our website. It's the most comprehensive website on the planet for Alzheimer's disease. My goodness, click away, go and visit our free website. And then I want to introduce you to our staff that are here for you. First, Christina, who is in charge of our Walk Into Alzheimer's for Laredo. Diane, who is in charge of our support groups, educational programs for Laredo. And Chelsea, who is in charge of all public policy and working with our politicians. So we know she has a super hard job. And then I do have Lisa Ayers, who is our development director for South Texas. And then I think Jimmy Funk, who many of you have probably met, who's been with us 20 years, who is our program director for South Texas. And as usual, she is running around like a chicken with her head cut off. But she is here, and again, a resource for you, for everyone in Laredo. These people are here for you. Oh, and I forgot Athena. Darn it, she probably ran off. She's working with our media. So she's here actually with Dr. Carillo and being interviewed at one of your stations. So please, I think, again, that is the one thing I hope that you do take away, is that you have us here to help walk you through this terrible, terrible disease. And I should add, and I can see Christina looking at me, the walk is on Saturday, September 26th. I forgot to say that. And last but not least, something new for Laredo. We have a board member for the first time from Laredo. And I can tell you, you probably know him, but he is the ultimate superstar. And he is, the reason that we are here is because of Joe. So I would like to welcome Joe to the mic to introduce our amazing speaker. And just please put your hands together, because he really cares about this talk.
Thank you, Meg. And I can't tell you how happy and delighted I am to see this room full. That's amazing. And it's important on many levels, I assure you. I have the extreme pleasure to introduce our, you want to talk about a superstar? This is the superstar, first of all. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Maria Carillo. As Chief Science Officer, Maria C. Carillo, PhD, sets the strategic vision for the Alzheimer's Association's Global REACH program. Under her leadership, the association is the world's largest nonprofit funder of Alzheimer's research and an internationally recognized pioneer in convening the dementia science community to accelerate the field. As a noted public speaker, and a darn good one, Dr. Carillo plays an instrumental role in the association's efforts to lobby both the public and private sectors for increased funding for the disease. Dr. Carillo oversees the implementation of the association's growing portfolio of research initiatives, including the Alzheimer's Association International Conference, the AAIC, the world's largest and most influential dementia science meeting, and the Research Roundtable, which enables international scientific, industry, and government leaders to work together to overcome shared obstacles in Alzheimer's science and drug development. In addition, Dr. Carillo manages the worldwide Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative, the WWADNI, a multi-country research effort aimed at accelerating the early detection of Alzheimer's. Dr. Carillo earned her PhD from Northwestern University's Institute for Neuroscience and completed a postdoctoral fellowship focused on Alzheimer's, brain imaging, and risk factors at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago. Ladies and gentlemen, we are so fortunate to have her here. Please welcome Dr. Maria Carillo.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon, I think, right? It's great to be with you today. Thank you so much for being here. It's nice to see some friendly faces here that have come from San Antonio, and thank you to some of our researchers that are in the room as well, and all of our health professionals, some of whom I know, and some of whom that I get to meet. And so maybe speak louder. I'll pick this up a little bit. How's that? Maybe that'll work. Okay. So thank you, and please give me any feedback. And I think we'll have time for questions afterwards as well. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of what we'll talk about in our time today. We'll talk a little bit about the landscape of what Alzheimer's and dementia is. We'll talk about the highlights of early detection and the latest advances in research, because I think that's what you really want to know about. But first, I'd like to make sure that I acknowledge that I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the local leadership that is so important to the work that we do. And I think all of you already know that Joe Arteaga is that local leader. We're so proud to have him on our board. So please join me in thanking him. Meg Barron, who is our local leader as well for the region and actually the state of Texas, which if you're in some states is not that big, but if you're in Texas, it's kind of big. So I'm learning this about Texas. It's pretty big. Thank you very much to Meg for that leadership on this such a large state level. I really appreciate it. Her team that is here is amazing, and some of the best professionals that I've ever worked with all around the country and really all around the world. When we talk about Alzheimer's and related dementia, there are some very unique things that I might mention that are unique to certainly perhaps our community, and by our community I mean Latinos, because I am Mexican American, and that is an important factor I think in a place like Laredo and South Texas in particular. But in addition to that, I know that myself, I have been touched by Alzheimer's and also by vascular dementia. We'll talk a little bit about those because my mother-in-law passed away of Alzheimer's 2 years ago. Her name was Arcelia, and Arcelia is the third of 4 siblings to die of Alzheimer's. So the youngest is still okay. She's still living happily in Monterrey, Nuevo León. And she is, we'll keep our fingers crossed for her being the survivor of this disease. And my father-in-law died about 8 months after her of vascular dementia. So very different presentation. We can certainly talk about those differences throughout this conversation, and if you have other questions, we can address those as well. So these are, I think, personal experiences that in the past 10 years, even 12 years, has changed my own perspective on what I talk about. So we'll, again, talk about all of that throughout. But I'm going to start with just giving you some overall information on what we know about Alzheimer's in particular. We publish this type of information yearly through a report that we publish called Facts and Figures. And Facts and Figures is a document that we use not only at the state and federal level, but we also use this document to talk to the National Institutes of Health, which has the most funding for Alzheimer's and related dementia research all over the world, as a matter of fact, followed up by the Chinese government, actually, interestingly enough. And so these are things that Facts and Figures, the document, you'll read also if you ever read scientific papers, because almost every researcher who writes a paper on Alzheimer's or related dementia talks about the urgency first, and the urgency is cited through the Alzheimer's Association's Facts and Figures report. And you'll see here that it is the 6th leading cause of death, and in a population over 65, it's actually the 5th leading cause of death, so it's important to recognize for our country. Dementia currently is a very costly disease. I think all of you recognize the reasons why. You're professionals or you've lived with this in your families or friends, and that most people will provide unpaid care, right? And we were in that category as a family. We decided to keep our loved ones at home, and we provided, care ourselves. But then actually we brought in 5 women who took turns every 8 hours, so we had a shift, so that we covered 24-hour care for both our loved ones in the home at the same time. And this was not billed to an insurance company, it was not billed to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. This is out-of-pocket family spending, making sure that our loved ones are taken care of for years and years until they passed away, and we were very proud of the fact that we were able to do that for them, because they took care of us, and now it was our turn to give back to them. So this is, again, a reflection of my personal experiences, and when I read these numbers, I'm like, how true all of this is. And, just thinking about the daily things that you have to do and think about that many of us probably, if we're not in the situation, don't. I'll give you an example. We have 2 loved ones in the home at the same time. We have, let's say, one of our loved ones, because this happens frequently, develops a UTI, has to go into the hospital because this is no longer routine for a person with dementia. And they have to stay in hospital for a couple of days. Well, now we have to have a caregiver at home with our dad, and a caregiver in the hospital, or us in the hospital with our mom, because you can't leave mom in the hospital. The hospital's not equipped to handle an overnight with a dementia case, right? She gets up, she wanders, she tears her down, she's confused, she doesn't know where she is. We have to have someone there. So now we got a double shift, right? So these are just things that until the first time it happened, we're like, oh, we now have to have either 2 shifts or somebody has to give up a day of work or more than a day of work in order to handle that. These are some of the things that we always face. And again, the Alzheimer's Association is here to walk you through all of these scenarios and provide help and support, whether it's online, through phone, or through our local connections and people that are on the ground. And those of you, I think many of you have already met some of that leadership here on the ground. And in particular, I talked about the impact on the Latinx or Hispanic community. And this is a number that is important because we have to recognize that there is a lot to unpack underneath an increased risk. And that we're still trying to discover what that increased risk is linked to. Because the increased risk for Latinos or the Latinx community is very specific to an increase in the risk factors that we'll talk about. And what that means for Alzheimer's, or perhaps vascular dementia, or other types of dementia, again, we'll also talk about. But just be aware that this is a number that we're keeping an eye on and trying to understand what that number comes from. So what is the science behind it? We do, though, know that, as you can see here, Latinos are less likely to receive a diagnosis than once. There's lots that could be unpacked there too, and that is not something I'll touch on too much during this conversation, but we know that some of this comes from perhaps the lack of the fear of stigma, the lack of the want to present our loved one to a doctor with having memory problems, which are so personal, especially when it's your grandmother or grandfather, the utmost respect in the family. There's lots of perhaps reticence on behalf of clinicians to give that diagnosis when they may not feel like there is so much they can do. So there's a lot to unpack there as well, but I think, again, I won't address that too much, but it's something that we are tracking and thinking about. And that's, unfortunately, just the idea of receiving an early diagnosis is a challenge for all populations around the country. So, but in particular, it seems to be more affecting the Latino population. And then this is just a snapshot of work that we have done. Again, that once a person is diagnosed with Alzheimer's or another dementia, but mostly with Alzheimer's, it happens later on in the stages. And that makes sense, because if your loved one, you're reticent to take your loved one to the clinician, or the clinician is reticent to make the diagnosis too early, once you get into more severe stages, you really can't deny that there is a disease and something is wrong, right? And so in the later stages, there is the opportunity then to have, you have to have a diagnosis at that point. And unfortunately, families may be very well incurring higher costs at that point because they haven't had the preparation or the thinking time about what that diagnosis could mean within the family. And I also talked a little bit about the other components that elevate the risk for the Latin community. And that is definitely cardiovascular related. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means in terms of risk for dementia and what it might mean specifically for Alzheimer's, because those two might be very different things. And we can talk again about what that means and where the overlap is. But on the front end of what we do as an organization, we do ensure that the federal and state governments understand that we have to fund this research, or we will never find that better treatment that slows or stops the progression of Alzheimer's or even other dementia. And so this is just a short summary of where we come from and where we are today. And the Alzheimer's Association, with its C4 organization and PAC, which is a political movement that we have used to create this opportunity that we see here, has increased funding to date to $2.8 billion. So that's really credit to our CEO, Harry Johns, and to our advocacy team in Washington, D.C., led by a guy named Rob Aggie, who have ensured that this type of dollar is available to the community. If you think about 2011, less than $450 million for, and I know the researchers in the room will know this as a fact, for all the research going on in the United States in 2011, it's absolutely a pittance because about half of it is used for direct research costs, and the rest is used for other things that researchers have to charge our federal government. So I won't get into those details, but I know that our researchers and clinicians in the room know what I'm talking about. So really, that only amounts to about $225 million. And you probably know that one grant is about $1 million, maybe $500,000. How many researchers can really be funded? 400 around the country? I mean, these are exaggerations, but it's not too far off from the reality. But today, we're at $2.8 billion, and so that really, if we think about what money has done for other diseases, right? We've got cardiovascular risk factors much more under control. Heart gets about $5 billion at the National Institutes of Health, and they have for over a decade. And cancer, over 2 decades, where cancer has been funded to the point of $5 billion for decades. And we have so many cancers that are now chronic diseases, manageable, cured. More to go, but those have been, we have made great strides. And look at HIV/AIDS and what's going on there. I mean, unbelievable when I saw that Time magazine, cover of a baby cured, right? Amazing. And that's what can happen in even a shorter term when we have $4 billion a year, right? Don't dedicate it to that research. We can do it too for Alzheimer's and other dementias. We just need that emphasis, and we're going to keep going to see how much more money we can get from our federal government. So that's an important contribution. But what do? Well, we as an organization are the largest nonprofit funder of Alzheimer's and related dementia research. And it's great to be here with all of you because I can share with you that I am the lead for this for our organization, and which is why I travel a ton. I travel about 70% of the time because I've got to keep track of the $185 million we currently have invested, thanks to many donors, many of you who are in the room, many of you who donate or walk for the Alzheimer's Association. And we are currently keeping our finger on the pulse on 540 projects that are going on in 30 different countries. The cure can come from anywhere, and our federal government keeps our money within the United States. It's your taxpayer dollars, makes sense. But the Alzheimer's Association knows that the cure can come from anywhere, and we want it faster. And we're agnostic about where it comes from. We just want it to happen. So we fund best in class all around the world. And there's a lot of great research in your community. I think very recently, at the end of last year, I was in San Antonio giving a talk, and I see some of our leadership from San Antonio here, and with researchers that have been funded by the Alzheimer's Association. So in South Texas, we do have quite a lot invested. This is just a quick snapshot. We've got volunteer researchers as well, some of whom are also in the room. And we have great institutions in South Texas that we fund directly and that we collaborate with. So there's a lot of great work happening here in your backyard. So I think I'm going to switch over now to really what the meat of our conversation is. And that is Alzheimer's and what it means to us and what it means, period. Now, I want to start by saying that dementia, you hear the term Alzheimer's, you hear the term dementia, and I think one of the very most common questions we get is, what is dementia? What's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's? Dementia is really a syndrome. It is a description of the clinical manifestation of a disease or something going on in a person's brain that may not necessarily be a disease per se. It could just be a manifestation of symptoms related to something else. So this is a collection, in particular, dementia is a collection of symptoms related to cognitive impairment, so memory problems in particular, but it can include behavioral problems, attention problems, other psychological issues that can again be under the term of dementia. They are primarily due to biological changes in the brain. So we think about psychiatry and some of the issues that may be underlying in psychiatric issues. Dementia of the Alzheimer type in particular will be biological, and so we treat it as a disease, right? And Alzheimer's is the most common cause. Mixed dementia with other causes, which I'll talk about here as well, is the most common on top of that. And in fact, it is thought that up to 70%, maybe more, of people with Alzheimer's dementia have a mixed dementia, Alzheimer's plus something else. And that some of these causes of dementia broadly, when it's not Alzheimer's or another disease, can be reversible, right? And so that's important because when we see that in our loved one, that's why medical attention is important. Maybe they're not getting the right nutrients. Maybe they're on a medication that is causing them issues. Maybe they're not sleeping. There's lots of other things. Maybe they have depression, and depression can be treated. So there's other things that we can see as causes. So I'd like to show this picture because dementia is more of an umbrella term. And then it's like saying cancer, and then, you can't cure cancer unless you know what type, right? And even when you know what type, today, it's personalized even more, right? More personalized with genetics and with other factors. Well, I think that's the way we're moving toward with dementia, in particular Alzheimer's, which is the most common form of dementia. But of course, vascular dementia is very real. As I mentioned, my father-in-law, Jose, had vascular dementia. And perhaps my mother-in-law had mixed dementia. We don't know because we did not get an autopsy. The family didn't want to do that. And you can see the Lewy body dementia, frontotemporal dementia, and there are so many other types of dementia out there that we can focus on. But again, right now we're looking at the most common cause, and that is Alzheimer's. So I'm going to give you a little bit of biology just so we all have the same level of information. Some of our researchers or clinicians might be bored during this section because they already know that, but I just want to make sure we're all level set on what we're going to be talking about in particular. But it's important to note that there are two hallmarks for Alzheimer's dementia. The first is neuritic plaques that were discovered actually about over 100 years ago by Dr. Alzheimer. They are deposits of a protein called beta amyloid. So it's and they form in these plaques. You can see here is a picture of a human brain under a microscope with some stains that are specific to this protein. And so that's one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's. The second are neurofibrillary tangles. And many of you might be familiar with these terms. And these are intracellular deposits inside the cell. They're deposits of a protein called tau. Now, the one thing I want to stress is that to date, the requirement for having Alzheimer's is to have both of these presentations, of these proteins. There may be other things as well, and I mentioned mixed dementia, the vascular components, like little tiny microhemorrhages, strokes, etc. There might be other proteins that we have discovered, will coexist. But primarily, if you have one of these and not the other, it is not Alzheimer's dementia. It is another type of dementia, okay? Just to be very clear, that is still the standard that has been revisited by collective groups of experts around the world, and that is still the standard we live with today. Understanding that there's a lot of other things going on, and that mixed dementia is, definitely a component we have to shoot for and we understand. And that all of this ultimately causes advanced Alzheimer's in a shrinkage of the brain, because it is what causes neurodegeneration, which is at the top of that picture of the brain. Neurodegeneration, that's really cell death. And that's the primary cause of a lot of the changes, the biological changes that we will observe that then turn into clinical manifestations in our loved ones, right? What we might have seen in the person. And it's important to recognize that at the end of the day, biology impacts behavior. Everything underlying what happens in the brain underlies the behavior that we then see manifested in our loved ones, okay? In ourselves, every day. And you can see pictures of, in severe Alzheimer's, where the amyloid plaques will proliferate to, where the tau tangles, different locations, will proliferate to, and ultimately the brain cell death, which causes those symptoms that we ultimately see in our loved ones with this disease. Make sense? Okay. So that's an important thing to remember as we talk about all of these other things within the next few minutes together. So to recap, so Alzheimer's dementia is a degenerative, means here, continuing to worsen disease of the brain. It is the most common type of dementia. It's a continuum that begins with symptoms that perhaps they occur before, perhaps the disease underlying the dementia occurs years before the symptoms can manifest themselves, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. And it does cause memory problems and causes deficits in our abilities to take care of ourselves. The activities of daily living, dressing yourself, being able to make yourself a sandwich, being able to understand how to keep yourself safe, turn off stoves, and other things that might put us in danger, right? So this is all part of those activities of daily living. But what other things could we expect? Well, some of those things involve personality changes. Very much, a factor for some individuals, but not for all. My mother-in-law was quite a happy person. My father-in-law became very paranoid with vascular dementia, confused, and thought that perhaps everything happening in the TV, especially with news and like cop shows, like were happening in his house. And so we had to be very careful on now what he watched, right? And if he even watched TV. So these things are different with different people. Depression has been talked a lot about. Is it the chicken or the egg? Is depression a risk factor, which many talk about it as such, or is it really a reflection of changes in the brain happening years before that end up causing some depression and causing our loved one to maybe retract from our family or social activities because they're noticing little changes, maybe not consciously, but unconsciously already noticing little things that they might be flubbing on, right? So understudied, okay? Being studied, but don't have an answer for that. Anxiety, same thing. Delusions, hallucinations. Some of these things can be affecting some individuals and some not, right? Apathy, general, again, withdrawal and seeming not to care much about things going on. Agitation. Wouldn't perhaps you be agitated a little bit? I certainly would if I was confused about things going on that should be usual orders of business in my house, or when I go to church and I hear mass, but now I'm confused. And so this could very well be a part of symptoms, and this includes sleep disturbances too. Again, sleep is, that's another one where it's a chicken and egg. Now, did our sleep disturbances start to exacerbate or cause some of these issues? Because sleep is so important for memory and brain health, as well as everything else. Or is it that as a result of these brain changes, we are affecting the sleep centers of the brain? Again, chicken and egg, and very much understudied, okay? But ultimately, as ALZ.org, in English and Spanish, you're going to find information on the benefits of an early diagnosis. Because ultimately, a lot of these questions can be discussed with a physician. And some of these things can be treated, right? Because you can get treatments for depression. You can try to figure out how you can treat sleep problems, anxiety, apathy. Those things can be treated as well. So these are things that are important. And so I'm not going to read these to you because you can find them online in English and Spanish, and you probably recognize some of these yourselves, right? I can give you examples that I talked about yesterday with some of our media who are in the room. And that my mother-in-law, one of the first signs I saw 3 years before her diagnosis, 3 years, was that she kept repeating the same things over and over, telling the same stories. Now, we're very respectful, and I was never going to tell her, Doña Celia, ya me platicó eso. I mean, I'm not going to tell her that, right? That would be like such an insult. Plus, I'm the daughter-in-law. She doesn't do that. So that's not going to happen. But, I started telling my husband, and his view was, you study Alzheimer's, you see Alzheimer's everywhere. Okay, that's the truth. Okay, fine. I then, callada la boca. But the other thing I noticed is that all of a sudden she was not able to articulate words that were very common. The first word I noticed that she could not remember, aguacate. I'm like, that's weird. She's like using other words to describe it. Esa cosa verde, esa fruta verde. And when you start to use these other words, now you're noticing that this is a problem, right? Word finding. The second word I noticed was, it was Ash Wednesday. Of course you're going to go to Mass because, or you're going to go to church because you're going to get your ashes. Yo quiero ir a misa because quiero esa cosa que te ponen aquí. Yo siempre quiero say the word ceniza, pero es miércoles de ceniza, so it's a part of the name of the day. So that was very strange, to me, and alerted me that something was happening. Ultimately, our family chose not to pursue these issues, and there are some visual disturbances sometimes in people with Alzheimer's or another dementia. And so she tripped on a little tiny rug, fell, she broke her wrist. She went to the emergency room and came out with a cast and a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. That's the way it happened. So, sometimes as much as we try to share with our families don't want to recognize it for various reasons that are quite valid. Like I said, I just be quiet and help whenever I'm asked to help. But let's talk about what we may impact risk, because that's an important thing to think about for all of us, any community, in particular Latino communities, but any community. At the top is always age. Age is so important because the older we are, the more these changes impact us. Genetics does play a role, and we don't fully understand that role, but there are a lot of risk genes that have been identified for the later onset Alzheimer's, the onset that's average age of 72 or 73. And of course, race ethnicity may very well be, and we can unpack some of this in a bit. But the others that I'll share with you that are being studied are listed here. Environmental factors, that means just where you live, pollution, other things that impact lifestyle. Are you able to go out and walk? Are you able to have other activities? Where are you isolated? Are you a person living alone? Cardiovascular health and physical activity, diet, sleep, all these things that I've talked about already. The level of education that you originally obtained, which we cannot change, but is a factor in the mixture of the ratio that we think about when we think about increased risk. And traumatic brain injury, which may not be directly related to Alzheimer's, but could be related to dementia broadly, right? We used to think it was very closely tied, but now research tells us today that it is, in traumatic brain injury may in fact be more closely related to another type of grouping of dementia called tauopathies, okay? And you've heard a little bit about this, about the football players and some of the unfortunate things that have happened. And those folks are really, again, they are exposed to repeated head injuries through their jobs, right? And things that they do for their jobs. So something slightly different, but definitely a part of the risks. So, but I will have to share with you that we are really proud that the way we can detect Alzheimer's in the brain of a person, of a living person, has changed. And today, we are seeing that biomarkers are changing, not the way we understand, not just the way we understand Alzheimer's and dementia, but how we potentially can treat it, how we can maybe even predict it, how we can identify it even earlier, because ultimately we don't want to identify it like my mother-in-law, she was already probably in the middle stages, right, by the time she went in. That's not where you want to treat. And so this will change the landscape of when we try to protect it if we do get a treatment, because everybody's going to want to go early, right? But right now we're not quite there yet. And I'm very proud of a recent contribution that we will make to the field, because we're partnering with on quite a few of these biomarkers, and I'll go through some of these very specifically. Certainly brain imaging I'll talk about. Maybe touch on some blood work that is in the future, but not quite there yet, and maybe touch on some of the emerging markers. So the hunt for biomarkers is really critical. When we think about cancer, when we think about diabetes, we think about heart disease, those markers have helped us find better treatments. And if you think about it this way, if you want to find out if you're pre-diabetic, your A1C levels can tell you that. And then you can take medications to, and they make lifestyle recommendations too, right? What you should eat, what you should not eat. My husband is, just turned 54. He had his doctor's appointment, and for the very first time, he's got high cholesterol and pre-diabetic. He's got to lose 10 pounds. So these are markers that when you know you have them, you can take steps to reduce your risk. Well, similarly, we're hunting for those types of markers for Alzheimer's and related dementia, right? And so those are important because they can measure brain changes. That's very hard to detect sometimes in blood, brain changes, because it's very far removed from the brain, but we're on the hunt. These are reliable predictors of the disease, perhaps even early, and maybe of the progression, right? I talked about the potential for that already impacts other diseases, and that for Alzheimer's in particular, a revolution that the Alzheimer's Association contributed significantly to creating and enabling is that we now in a PET scan can in fact detect these amyloid plaques that I talked to you about very early on, that is one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's. And before this in 2006, 2007, 2008, we were never able to image these and see. We were just assuming that they were there when we had a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. And sometimes we were wrong. Sometimes it was a different type of dementia, and 30% of those individuals probably didn't have Alzheimer's, and we still labeled them Alzheimer's. So we definitely need these biomarkers, and you can see that a person with Alzheimer's disease has a brain lit up with red where there are plaques. And a cognitively healthy, age-matched individual, same age, does not have those when they do not have Alzheimer's. Does that make sense? So this is a window that we never had before, which will accelerate the pace of what we can do in drug discovery. And one of the important contributions of this was that we discovered that perhaps 20 years or more before symptoms appear, the brain changes may begin. And you can, in fact, with a PET scan that I just showed you, see those amyloid plaques. And when we first discovered that that was the case in people without memory problems through the study that the Alzheimer's Association facilitated, it was an aha moment for the field. Because before that we thought plaques are Alzheimer's along with tangles, and so if you don't have memory problems, why would you have plaques yet? It should be together. We didn't think of it as cholesterol 30 years before the heart attack, right? We thought of it together, and we were wrong. We were wrong. And that's okay, that's what science is, right? It's correcting your assumptions through more work. But today we know that these amyloid plaques could appear 20 years before, and that, you know, the conundrum in the field was, well, are they even relevant? You know, they've been a hallmark for so long. And the answer is they are relevant, and today's research tells us they may just be a portender very early on. Maybe we may be able to treat them like a cholesterol. If you slow or decrease or stop, could they delay or stop the onset of the tau tangles, which follow, by the way, and then the onset of the neurodegeneration, cell death, and the symptoms? Possibly. So we're on the hunt for that type of information. But ultimately, there are other biomarkers that we are now able to detect. And it's important to recognize that very recently, we are able to detect tau tangles in the human brain as well. This is another revolution, because by the time we detect tau tangles in the brain, these are very correlated with the memory changes we are observing in our loved ones. Very correlated, as opposed to what I told you about amyloid, that it could be 20 years before, right? So this is really interesting. You see here the healthy individual, the person with what we call an intermediary stage, not really dementia, doesn't qualify, but has some memory problems. We call it mild cognitive impairment. I've labeled it MCI on this slide. And then mild Alzheimer's dementia, and then severe Alzheimer's dementia, more of that red and yellow lighting up in those parts of the brain. Now this is important because by the time an individual has tau in their brain, like you see with mild Alzheimer's and the severe, it's a guarantee at that point in the studies that have been done to date, that there's also amyloid in their brain. Very interesting, isn't it? It's like a 98% correlation. That might mean we don't always need an amyloid scan if you already have the clinical presentation of mild or severe Alzheimer's. But even though amyloid imaging is already approved by the FDA, and it was approved in 2013, tau PET imaging is not yet approved by the FDA. The company that is leading this particular diagnostic is Eli Lilly. They have submitted this diagnostic to the FDA for approval. And so we hope, we imagine, that in 2020, there will be an FDA-approved Eli Lilly tau imaging agent. There will be more after that, but they're the first. Okay? So just to let you know that this is coming perhaps to a clinic near you. And you got a lot of them here. But biomarkers are changing the game. And I'm going to just briefly talk about, of course, the first two I already mentioned, but blood tests are in the works already. CSF, cerebral spinal fluid, can be measured. You essentially have to have a little bit of a lumbar puncture to pull out that cerebral spinal fluid. So it's a little bit more invasive than a blood test or even an imaging scan, which all it does is actually inject a radioactive dye. But some people might prefer some for others. Some people, for health reasons, might be able to tolerate one versus the other. And there is a lot of work on these things that are even further out in the future. Saliva, retinal imaging. And I'll tell you that even, for saliva, we're still further out, but for retinal imaging, a few years ago, I would have said this is pie in the sky. But we had a recent meeting in Washington, D.C. with over 25 retinal tests. And they're looking better and better. I mean, they're not going to be at your eye doctor's office tomorrow. But imagine if we could have a retinal type of test, because many of us, especially as we get older, go to see our eye doctor a little bit more often, right? Sometimes more often than our regular doctor. So that could be another way to provide early detection to communities, right? So I think these are something to watch for the future, besides the two that I've already mentioned that are FDA approved or perhaps about to be FDA approved in 2020. But blood tests were the rage in the last year. There is a global race to try to get to that, because ultimately that's the cholesterol test that then leads you to all of the other things that would be recommended, right? And so that's what we need to do. And we thought this was science fiction as of 5 years ago. We have such strong tests now that are maybe in hundreds of people. They may be in thousands of people, so this is why I'm telling you it's not quite ready yet. But these tests include other proteins that I talked about that are in the brain that we might be able to detect that would help us understand mixed dementia. And again, they're not ready for prime time, so no need to get worried or excited. It depends on which one you might get, because it's still a lot of work to be done in this arena. But what we do know, is, from what I talked to you about, is that the biomarkers to date that we have in-house to do research on, that some of them have reached the clinic, tell us that there is a continuum of disease that is important to recognize, especially for us that might see this in our loved ones or folks around us, that you don't just wake up one day with a diagnosis, right? That we go from being cognitively impaired to have mild cognitive impairments that I mentioned, MCI, to have mild dementia, moderate to all the way to severe. And this is a continuum that is dynamic. It can shift back and forth. We have good days, we have not such good days. Even me as a person, even a kid can have a good day and a bad day, right? And it depends on a lot of things, that you sleep, how much you eat, all things around you. But this is a continuum. And on the left side of the screen is really the impairment that doesn't interfere with your daily life, and on the right side it interferes with activities and more functions, and you have to have two or more of those to sort of qualify for the dementia. That's the clinical diagnosis, and the clinicians in the room know that already. But mild cognitive impairment is another risk factor for dementia. Some people stay in mild cognitive impairment because it can be caused by other things. Some people progress. And it may very well be Alzheimer's, but it could be vascular, and it could be another type of dementia. So it's important to recognize that early. And everyone who experiences dementia does pass through these stages, and that's important to recognize too. Because if you can prevent the disease from happening even at the mild dementia, of the underlying changes, even at mild cognitive impairment, you're preventing the rest. So that's something that the scientific community is shooting for. So how is a potential therapy developed? Well, it takes several years to study it under a microscope and in animals. It takes months to study it for the first time in a human being. Months, and usually you're trying to just see if it's safe, right? Because you're experimenting from an animal, and we are not mice, right? We're not dogs and cats. And so we have to do that type of work. But then in a phase 2, you need more people, and it's going to take years to get to a phase 2 where you're really looking at dose, and you're going to put this medication in a person that has the disease of interest, right? You're going to be looking for that type of participant. And then in phase 3, how do you validate that this is the case in not only 100 or 200, but in thousands? And that's why this process can take up to 15 years, and that's why research can be slow in developing these types of drugs. Now let me tell you that a game changer would be a biomarker that we know changes with the therapy. So a diabetes trial can be done in 6 months, because if you're changing A1C, you already know that you're changing the trajectory of diabetes, right? If you change cholesterol, like when your doctor gives you a statin and your cholesterol is lower, you know you're reducing your risk. All those studies have been done. We don't have that yet, and that's why this takes 10 to 15 years. We don't know if lowering amyloid in the brain yet will help you make sure that you don't get the symptoms of mild cognitive impairment or mild dementia. We don't know yet. Only by embedding these biomarkers in these trials are we going to find that information. So we're not where cancer is, we're not where diabetes or cholesterol, heart disease tests, high blood pressure. We're not there yet, but we're moving in that direction, and we're taking a page out of those books to try to apply it here to see if we can accelerate the pace of our research by copying what they've done successfully, right? This is a picture of a current landscape as of January of what's in the pipeline for Alzheimer's and really all dementia research. The phase 1 I talked to you about 108 projects. Phase 2, 181. And phase 3, the closest to what would be approved in your, and for use in the clinic, approved by the FDA, about 55. And this includes cognitive assessments, cognitive training, and computerized devices. So when we're talking about drugs that we all think about as the medications we would get in the pharmacy, prescribed by your doctor, we're talking more like currently maybe 13 of those. Now, if this was cancer, that would be like 3,000. So we're working on that, and I think more money in the field will generate more shots on goal. We're not there yet because it takes time for that money to be delivered to the scientific community in the United States, for them to do the work, more ideas and more targets to come up. That takes time. So but we are moving in the right direction, right? Because we have more money, and that's thanks to the Alzheimer's Association. I'm very proud of that, because when I go around the country talking to researchers, they feel that, right? They feel that more grants are coming in because there is more money for them. And there are advances in medications being approved for, maybe not the memory part, but for other symptoms that are associated with dementia. And that's actually very important. These are advances, especially when I think about agitation, sleep disturbances, psychosis, apathy, that impact your daily life, that impact the quality of life. Like for us, sleep disturbances were the biggest issue, right? When you have a loved one that confuses night-day cycles, that has problems going to sleep and is up all the time, our caregivers have a harder time caring and keeping our loved ones safe, right? And they're tired at different times, and being tired contributes to all of the things that we feel and express, right, as people. And so that's an important thing. And there are advances. I'm just going to name 2 of those. The first is a medicine that's focused on behavioral and psychological symptoms called Nuplazid. And it has been FDA approved for other psychosis, but now they have a positive trial in Alzheimer's, in particular in broad dementia. And they are submitting for regulatory approval at FDA, and they hope to get a green light by this summer. So that's an important contribution. Now, this has already been proven for Parkinson's disease, so it is available for Parkinson's, but now has been proven to work according to the company, in people with dementia, and that's what their new application at the FDA is for. It's for Nuplazid to be used in a dementia population. So that phase 3 study was positive, and if the FDA reviews it and says it believes it will be approved hopefully in the next coming months. And that's progress. Again, quality of life is very important for all of you who are familiar with living with a person and taking care of your loved one with dementia. This second one is focused on insomnia and sleep. Again, very relevant to what we experienced, is for mild to moderate, and is the first already approved insomnia drug in the dementia population. This is from Merck. So important to understand that there is progress in the sense that there are other things that we may be able to use to help our loved ones at home. And again, keeping them happier, safer, healthier for the long run. But there is a bigger news piece that happened last year. And many of you will remember that this drug, maybe you don't remember the drug, you remember the company, Biogen, announced a bit of a roller coaster ride for us last year. In April, this company announced that they were stopping a drug trial completely because of futility, which means that they've analyzed the data separately at a cutoff point, and that there was no hope for the drug to be positive. And we all had a lot of hope because this drug, we thought, could actually do everything we've just talked about. Slow or reduce the decline in people with mild Alzheimer's. We thought, and it cleaned the brain, if you remember some of this research, our research, it cleaned the brain of the amyloid. Actually looked very clean. It took out all the amyloid plaques that you could see with the PET scan, by the way, right? There might be more that we can't detect with the PET scan underlying it. So when this report came out in April that they were going to stop it, it was a blow. It was a blow to the community broadly, scientific community, clinical community, and all of our families that track this. Then all of a sudden in October, it was like back up because the company announced that in fact they have reanalyzed additional data, not just the cutoff point data, and that at that point they felt they had a positive study. Even though they hadn't completed the study, they felt they had enough data to look positive enough to go to the FDA and ask for approval of this treatment. That was revolutionary because it's been 15 years since we've had a drug go to the FDA for even consideration for slowing a memory decline. That hadn't happened in 15 years, and the 15 years before that are all of the ones we know today that are FDA approved that we know are only symptomatic, right? That don't treat the underlying disease like the plaques and the tangles or anything else that's going on. So where are we today on this? The drug company, we have talked to them extensively as an organization, as we do with any drug company, before they make announcements. They're very kind and will work with us to make sure that we can have talking points so that if you all have questions, you can go to the Alzheimer's Association and our leadership around the country is ready to answer your questions. So we've done that. And this just takes you through that timeline because it tells you where we are today. That they are submitting for regulatory approval. They said early 2020. We expect this to happen any day now. And then all we do is wait for FDA rigorous review and for the FDA to make a decision on whether they will approve this drug. This drug is an infusion. It's a once-a-month infusion, so you have to sit for a little bit of time and get an infusion through your veins. And so it is a little bit different. It's not a pill form. There's all kinds of things that we can talk about in terms of access to this drug, but just know that the Alzheimer's Association is thinking about all of these things very much so, and we'll share with you as much as we know. And again, keeping in touch with our leadership and ensuring that you track the Alzheimer's Association's webpage because we'll share information as we see it. And lastly, I'll just share with you that on this front, we're really proud of our own contributions because we are not putting our eggs in the amyloid basket, right? I think some people might think the community is, but the Alzheimer's Association is not. We have funded to date 36 clinical trials ourselves in non-amyloid and non-tau, 90% is non-tau as well, drug targets. So we're looking for other ways that Alzheimer's is affected, that dementia broadly is affected in an individual. And we're very proud that Bill Gates, who all of you know is now in the Alzheimer's space because his father has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, is a partner with us on this next iteration. So we'll be funding $30 million more this calendar year for more clinical trials in phase 1 and phase 2. For those researchers in the room, these are the areas of focus that our team and the Gates team have decided are going to be the areas of focus for clinical trials. It's mitochondria. It's basically the energy cell producer in your brain cells, so very important. Clearance. How do you clear the garbage out to make sure you have a healthy brain? And vascular contributions that I talked about are very important risk factors, which can elevate the risk, in particular for Latino communities who have higher risk factors for cardiovascular, which are risk factors for Alzheimer's and other dementias. So these are the things we're looking at. And I'll just share pictures of, well, you all know who that is, but Mikey Hogue, you might not know. And Mikey Hogue is the founder of the program called Part the Cloud, and it is our clinical trial program. This will bring our clinical trials from 36 to probably 60 in this particular year alone, up to $60 million now, because she's matched Bill Gates' $10 million with her own $20 million. So we're very lucky that we have such generous donors, not only like yourselves who participate in WASP, but people who want to actually get things done. Both of her parents have died of Alzheimer's in the past 2 years, and she is very concerned for herself and her family, and she's a person of means and wants to put, again, her money where her mouth is. So we're very lucky to have these individuals, and I'm particularly very blessed to work with all of you and all of these individuals around the country. And we've met with the Gates team, we've met with Bill, and with the Gates team several times as well. And it's again, an honor and a blessing for me to be a part of those conversations, because this is how we are going to get things done. I'm going to talk to you a little bit. I'm running out of time.
No, I think nobody wants you to stop.
Okay. I want to talk to you about what we can do today, because all of this is what's coming in the future. And one of those things involves a very important study that was reported very recently on blood pressure. And I'm not going to read this to you for sake of time, but that blood pressure study was so important. And how many of you know what your blood pressure is? Okay, I know mine is. Okay, good. You should know, because it's so important. And this study took people with blood pressure at 140, which was at the time the standard, and lowered it to 120 through medication only, by the way. And this is what they found, that over the course of the years of the study, and I won't get into the details of the study for lack of time, but 19% of those individuals reduced their risk of mild cognitive impairment. 17% reduced their risk of dementia broadly, and 15% combined. Now remember what I told you, that if you reduce the risk of mild cognitive impairment, what do? You reduce the risk of entering into dementia. That's a big deal. So this is something we could all talk about and do today. Know your numbers. Make sure you can take care of them. Or avoid it. If you don't have high pressure yet, high blood pressure, avoid it. Because there are things you can do to do that. And we all know what they are. We just maybe sometimes want to pill, but that's okay. But there are things that you can do today. And this is an immediate opportunity that we think about. So what we have decided to do is to take a look at a lot of data that tells us that perhaps a combination of interventions might be what we need. It's not just one thing, right? Blood pressure is important, but there's other things we should be doing, right? And again, I know everybody's like, oh, just give me a pill. But physical activity, we want to do that. We want the healthy diet. We want the cognitive stimulation, cognitive engagement, keep your brain, and if your brain is like a muscle, if you don't use it, it's going to atrophy, right? So let's keep this in. How do we get the most out of this synergy of these things? Well, I'll tell you that there's a country that was very advanced, and 7 years ago did this study already in 1,260 people that were 60 to 77 years old at an increased risk. And they did a 2-year study of all of these things put together to see if they could improve or not their memory, or maybe even slow the cognitive decline. These people did not have mild cognitive impairment, they did not have dementia, they're just individuals at risk, okay? So I'm just gonna show you a quick slide of data. The individuals in the red were the control participants. They did not do the intervention. People in the other color, the darker green or blue, whatever you might see, if you're colorblind, I apologize, are the ones that did the intervention. And so you can see that they did improve their cognition in 2 years. Now, improving your cognition goes a long way towards perhaps protecting your brain, maybe delaying effects. We don't know, but this did work in Finland. Now, we're not Finland. We are the US. We don't look like Finns. We don't have the social structure. We don't have the social safety net. Everybody goes to college there. Everybody has great access to health care. They all look the same. They're all Euro-white individuals. And we are very different. But what we've decided to do is to see if we can prove this in the United States. Now, we is the Alzheimer's Association because there's no return on investment here. There's no patent at the end of the day that a drug company is going to do this study and patent it. There's nothing that, the federal government is a little slow sometimes, so we decided to do this ourselves. And we're going to take a look at 2 different ways to study this lifestyle factor. Self-guided and structured. Self-guided means we're going to give you all of the information you need to know to do it. Structured means we're going to work with you to create a plan for how you can integrate this in your life, okay? And we're going to do it together over the course of 2 years, okay? So we're going to randomize individuals, 2,000, across 5 sites. We picked Houston under the leadership of Meg Barron, who is here. There's a lot of pressure on you, Meg, but we will all be working together because we are committed to diversity. We want there to be a significant percentage of African Americans and Latinos. We want there to be a significant diversity representation between rural and urban. And so we are committed to that. We also want Asian population, which is why we're in San Francisco, Northern California, Davis, Sacramento areas. So what you see here is that we have 5 sites. You see Wake Forest is one of the areas, or the Carolinas in general, because we try to be more than just one state. Chicago, Illinois, which included Michigan and some parts of Wisconsin. Again, you've got Houston and South Texas broadly, and Northern California. We just announced our 5th site, which is Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire area, okay? Under the leadership of Steve Salovey. Many of you might know who he is. So this is what we're doing, $35 million study for the Alzheimer's Association. Again, 2 types of structures, so we're really proud of that. And these are the 4 things we're going to do underneath there, okay? Don't ask me too many details about them. I can't give away secrets, because if you want, you got to try to find a tribe and sign up for it. But these are the things that we're going to do. I think the future, I'm almost done. I think the future, and it's not just what I think the scientific community understands that the future of treating dementia broadly, but in particular Alzheimer's, will rest in something we do already for other diseases. And it is a combination of treatments and medicines and recommendations on reducing your risk, changing the way you live your life, right? Diabetes does, even cancers do this, right? At heart, it's the bottom line. What did my husband get? He didn't get a statin right now. They said, eat oatmeal every other day, no red meat and fatty stuff, drink less alcohol, lose weight, and exercise. I mean, right? It's all these things right, and then you might give it to a statin if you cannot get your act together. So we're working on that. And he's really bummed because there's a lot of good Mexican food that he cannot eat. He's from one that I know, it's like, that is so bad. So anyway, but this is the future. This is the future, right? The future for Alzheimer's as well. And so let me leave you with how we think of this framework today. So in the middle we've got Alzheimer's. And we're talking about the disease. So I'm talking about the continuum, all the way from when it's silent, all the way to when it's manifested by cognitive problems and dementia, all the way to severe. So that encompasses everything. And underneath this is brain changes, right? Amyloid brain changes, tau brain changes, vascular contributions we talked about, immune function, right? Immunity, and all that, cell-to-cell communication, so much more we can talk about, antioxidants, so much more we can talk about and unpack here. Ultimately, biomarkers for each of those representations in the brain are being developed. And I already talked to you about biomarkers for tau, biomarkers for amyloid plaques. There are now biomarkers being developed for inflammation and immunity in the brain. There are biomarkers for vascular contribution. There's biomarkers for cell-to-cell communications, neuronal communications at the synapse, at the junction level of cells to cells. That's happening. Ultimately, for whatever might be wrong in us, we might get a prescription that matches what's happening in our brain. Personalized medicine, personalized approach, just like cancer does, right? And ultimately, that we hope will either slow or stop. And the earlier that is introduced, the better the outcomes are. Like, we don't wait today for you to have an outright tumor to start getting treatment. We look for precancerous cells. And the earlier you have the diagnostic, the better your outlook is. And it'll be very similar here. And on top of that, there will be modifiable risk factors that will be addressed. Thanks to the U.S. Pointer Study and the Alzheimer's Association, I'm committed to that, because I know that's not going to That's not gonna make money. So we have to do it. So that's, I think, what the future looks like, right? That's what we may be experiencing, maybe even in the next 2 years, depends on what happens with Biogen and the FDA, maybe the next 5 with other drugs in the pipeline. So let's wait and see. So my last slides are really how you can get involved. You all know that because you know the Alzheimer's Association, you know Joe and his leadership, you can contact him, he's everywhere. I looked him up online just before I came here. And I'm like, oh, so he's the guy to talk to. And one last thing, we have an app. We have an app that can answer a lot of questions for you. It's free on your, whatever, I use Google, so your Play Store, whatever the iPhone is of that, I don't know, but this has an app, and if there's news, there will be interpretations of that news for you. I provide much of that, so it'll say, Maria says this is what you should take home from that, because you might read walnuts as the next best thing, you should only eat walnuts. Well, probably not. So, we'll have interpretations of the news, including the bigger news that may or may not be coming out this year with a lot of the drugs and the diagnostics that I talked about with you today. So thank you very much. I know you're probably 8 into times for questions, but there's a lot to talk about.
I think we have time for, I think we have time for a couple.
Couple questions, but as everybody's thinking of a question, if we don't get to your question, we have business cards outside for all the staff I introduced. Please email me your questions and we will get you your answer. And also, I did neglect to introduce some amazing people. Melissa and Nydia, will you please stand up? Running the support group here for over 20 years, starting our walk here. They are a perfect example of our Purple Army. And then Esther Fuentes is from McAllen and is from Doctors Hospital, who has been an amazing volunteer for many, many years. Okay, we have staff on either side. They can run the mic to you if you have a question.
Majority of the time, you remember my phone number. But what I don't understand is how can you not remember one thing and remember it and remember my phone number to the T all the time?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I think that happens a lot to all of us as we observe our loved ones. And that's what makes it harder, I think, to know in our minds as well as our hearts that there might be a problem, because it's so different. And you're like, maybe I just saw there, maybe it was a day that was off. But ultimately, there is a decline over longer periods of time, because dementia is very slow if it continues to decline. But it also depends on what kind of dementia. So we can talk offline, but because it really depends on what he's been told he has, what his risk factors are. So why don't we talk offline? But that is something that is very common that a lot of us in the room that have had that experience will share with you. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Maybe you can hear me well, but first of all,
Nice to see you.
nice to see you, Dr. Carillo. We met last year in San Antonio. I'm the health director here, and so welcome to Laredo. This is an issue that we're certainly very concerned with the public health side, especially for communities like Laredo, because we're aging. We still have a younger population that has all the other cardiovascular issues. And so we've been doing at the health department a lot of wellness, physical activity, brain health. And then, I don't know if Dr. Keenan is here, but we're partnering with UT Health San Antonio to do 2 things. Train physicians to recognize this. And then we're under Dr. Shishatra, that we're going to be doing a Alzheimer's clinic at the health department, hopefully by May. My concern is we have a very large uninsured population. And so accessing care, the clinic's going to help because we're bringing a team of experts. But any support for making sure that screening and detection is covered for the mass majority, certainly counting on us. And I don't know if you know, because Alzheimer's and dementia should be covered, a covered benefit, exactly like maternal child health. This is another issue that we have a concern.
Those are very important issues, and I know that our public policy and advocacy department is the one that's thinking about those. Meg Barron in particular, with her leadership of the public policy on the state level. Because not all states have the same issues rise to the top, right? We all got relatively similar issues, but some rise to the top for some states than in comparison to others. So I know that that is something that we're in touch with here for the state. So there's more that we can talk about offline, but certainly as an organization, we can be helping with awareness, which is I think one of the bigger things before you can even take your loved one to a clinic, right? All the education and awareness on when you might want to do that and how, because of all of the stigma and all of the cultural issues that surround our families. And I will tell you that when we have our findings from the U.S. Pointer study, we'll be working very closely with health systems. I met some of the leadership of health systems last night at Joe's house, and we'll be working very closely to try to make sure those messages get out through not only those clinic channels, but public health offices and the CDC. So we're creating a partnership right now with the CDC to try and do that on a national scale. So all of this is in the works. I completely understand, and that, you know, when you said, can you come to Laredo? And you know, Meg makes it happen. So thank you for everything that you do and for ensuring that that cutting edge research and information comes down into all of South Texas, because that's important. Thank you.
I have a question regarding the biogen information that you shared. I know that you talk a lot about the risk factors for Alzheimer's being, you know, our lifestyle, you know, cardiovascular issues, diabetes, all those things. But because the name of the drug caught my eye because my husband has an autoimmune condition and he uses a biologic. So are they not now finding that inflammation is a factor?
So that's a great question. I mean, two separate answers. First of all, aducanumab has a similar name to a lot of those inflammation drugs because it's a mAb. It's a monoclonal antibody. That's what mAb means. So it's got to be delivered through infusion. It's like a Humira or other things that you see advertised for rheumatoid arthritis and other things. So it's a mAb. But it is not, that's where it stopped. That's where the similarity stopped. Okay? Beyond that, the work being done on aducanumab is very specific to removing amyloid species from the brain. Okay? So that's the first answer. So very good observation. The second answer is that yes, there is a lot of work being done on clinical trials in anti-inflammation, on I would say modulating immunity. Our immune system is supposed to get rid of things that are not good, but as we age, it can be compromised. Some diseases can compromise us, and so how do we help our immune system get that stuff out? We ourselves funded $3 million with Mikey Hope, who you saw there, last year in clinical trials, and have added $3 more million to that for anti-inflammation. So all of that work is being done, and so the MAB you saw is just the fact that it's a type of drug that is going to be delivered through an infusion, but beyond that, yes, there's a lot of work in there. Thank you.
Frank, we're out of time, but I promise to email those questions, and thank you for letting us go over, and sorry, thank you. Thank you.
It got out of hook. I'm on my way to San Antonio. Thank you. It's fantastic. I'll see you there. Yes,